that they can depend on their friends to bail them out and make sure that they pay current on the debt. So the global financial sector of British banks, Swedish banks, and other banks work hand in hand basically with the criminalized classes that took over the assets of the post-Soviet economies, the Baltics, Central Europe, just as they did in Iceland. And somehow this hasn't got into the economic textbooks, that neoliberalism is a partnership in financial crime, basically, and the world is now seeing all of the unstated assumptions that are not written into the textbooks that economic students are indoctrinated with.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, Iceland recovering from neoliberal disaster. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. And I guess, as you have mentioned, the United States is the one country in the world that is in a completely different position regarding having to pay off foreign debt.
Yes, our foreign debt is in our own currency. And if the dollar goes down, other currencies will have less of their own money that they can get for these dollars, but the American debt won't go up if the American currency goes down. We'll still owe dollars. The dollars just will be worth less and less and less. So America can inflate its way out of debt. Other countries can't.
Is Iceland willing to impose the kind of austerity programs that devastated third world countries from the 1970s to the 1990s?
No democracy is able to do that. You need a dictatorship or an oligarchy to do that. And that's why financial institutions don't like democracy. That's why they insist that central banks have to be independent from the political process, meaning that voters won't have any voice over the policy. But Iceland is a European-type social democracy, and of course, no social democracy is going to vote for feudalism. It turns out that when neoliberals talk about the post-industrial society, they don't really mean going forward at all. They mean lapsing back into feudalism, and Iceland said, look, we spent centuries trying to advance from feudalism. At least we had a self-sustaining economy through the 1980s. It wasn't a very rich economy, but at least everybody was independent and self-sufficient, and now you want us all to go back to dependency on a group of financial lords, except in this case, instead of landlords, they're going to be financial creditor institutions, and these institutions will largely be foreigners. We got our independence from Denmark during World War II because we thought at that time Denmark had been conquered by the Nazis, and we wanted to protect our democracy from a parent country that was losing the war. We're not going to now give up what we won in World War II just so that we can pay the foreign creditors. If the price of paying England is to give up democracy and become a feudal oligarchy, we're not going to vote for that.
How is Iceland then proposing to repay its debt?
It's proposing to ask Europe, how on earth are you going to let us pay our debts? If you buy our cod at, say, $1,000 a pound, no problem. Buy our cod for $1,000 a pound. Then we can pay off the debts. But if you're going to buy our cod at a very low rate, and if you're going to say, if Iceland joins Europe, you have to let the British fishermen and the Dutch fishermen and Norwegian fishermen into our fishing grounds, so we can't even control our own national water rights, then we are only going to pay you what we're able to pay that's limited to 3% of the growth. Actually, it's altogether England and Holland, 6% of the growth in gross domestic product as of 2008 will be allocated to pay the IceSave depositors. So to the extent that our gross domestic product can grow over what it was in the last healthy year of growth we had, 2008, we'll be willing to pay you. But if you, England and Holland, take punitive action against us, if you try to isolate us, if you treat us like you treat Cuba and North Korea, and you make us shrink, then there won't be any growth out of which to pay you, and we won't owe you anything.
Exactly, because then if the IMF and the World Bank imposed austerity on them, they would have no growth in GDP, and therefore they wouldn't pay anything.
That's the point. And that's why they're taking 2008 as the base year, not 2009, when the GDP's fallen by probably 18%, as it has in the Baltics. The Icelanders joke that they're the most post-Soviet economy in the West because they are almost the twin of the Baltic states.
Now, how is it that Iceland is the first economy to push back against the EU and the IMF debt repayment plan?
They were driven to the wall and had no alternative. The alternative to pushing back was to lapse back into feudalism, and you're not going to have any democracy voluntarily give up its economic freedom and go into centuries of debt peonage. Third world countries were able to because the United States had backed creditor oligarchies there with force of arms, as it did in Chile. But unless England can put the equivalent of a General Pinochet in control of Iceland and say, this dictator is for free markets, Chicago style, and if you don't like what we're doing, we're going to kill you. We're going to close every university in the country, economics department. We're going to shoot all the labor leaders. If England is not willing to do that and have a domestic Pinochet, then it's going to have to abide by the democratic decisions of Iceland.
Now, this democratic decision of Iceland with regard to its debt repayment is a real game changer for the global financial economy, isn't it?
Yes, and here's the problem for England and Holland. For the last 400 years, England and Holland have represented the basic creditor interests. When England was a debtor country, it created monopolies, the South Sea Company, the Bank of England itself, most of all the East Indies Company, and its large privatized monopolies were bought by the Dutch. And the Dutch were the bankers at that point. So first the Dutch in the 17th century and then England in the 19th century have become the main creditor interests. If they accept the principle that the Icelandic democracy is putting forth, then it'll be open for the Baltics to say, wait a minute, we want a capacity to pay principal too. We're just like Iceland. You neoliberals have stolen our property by telling us to give it to the kleptocrats so you won't lend money. The EU has given money just for us to repay the foreign bankers. We escaped communism to have industrial capitalism, social democracy style that Western Europe had. We didn't give up communism to revert back to feudalism. Communism was our alternative to feudalism. We want to become industrial capitalists just like you. We want to be democracies, and now you're telling us that we have to do what Iceland has turned down? We're as strong as Iceland. And they're going to say exactly the same thing. So the game is over for the neo-feudalist creditor class in the world.
Now, do you think that Iceland's going to be able to stick to its guns on this matter?
Absolutely. It doesn't have a choice. Its freedom is at stake. Its independence is at stake. To give in to England is to go into a century of debt peonage, and that has become more and more clear. The Icelanders, first of all, got furious last October when Gordon Brown classified them as a terrorist country. A terrorist country means we can't pay. England and Gordon Brown have said a country that can't pay its debts is, by definition, a terrorist country. And so what England did was then impose financial terrorism on Iceland, freezing its foreign exchange in London, which was basically the banking center of Europe and the North Atlantic, and essentially making it impossible for Icelanders, even normal Icelanders, to use the banking system to pay their debts. So this bankrupted overnight, a lot of Icelandic firms and Icelandic individuals lost their savings as a result of foreclosures. So Iceland already began to get angry. It voted out the neoliberal government, which was very largely the Independence Party, which obviously should have been called the Dependency Party. But if you're neoliberals, you use Orwellian doublethink and you call yourself the Independence Party. They voted it out of power, and a coalition was voted in this April. The coalition was led by the Social Democrats and by the Green Party. The Social Democrats essentially wanted to join Europe on almost any terms. The Greens didn't want to join Europe. They were more independently minded, but they had appointed as a foreign minister a former communist labor organizer who really wasn't very at home in international finance. And when the finance